Okay. So we have it set up here. We talked about the individual brokerage account, right? Yes. Okay. If I have, if I hold a stock for less than a year in an individual brokerage account, how is that going to get taxed? What category is that going to be in? It's going to be a higher percent. What category? What is it? What is it called? Short-term capital gains. Okay. So less than 1 year is short-term cap gains. I hold something in an individual brokerage account for greater than a year, it's long-term, and are my tax rates lower? Yes. The three tax brackets for long-term capital gains are 0%, 15%, and 20%. Okay, so if you don't make a lot of money and you have long-term capital gains, you're not going to be paying a lot of taxes on it. If you make a middle amount of money, a medium amount of money, and you have long-term capital gains, you're going to pay 15%. Okay, and to give you an idea of how much of a savings that is, let's pull up the tax brackets. I want that one. Okay, we'll just look at single filers. Okay, so 0 to 40. So if you make under $40,000 a year, your long-term capital gains rate is 0%. Your income rate that was 2000. Here's 2020. Okay, is going to be about little effective rate's going to be a little bit more than 11%. Okay, because here is the 40 bracket, and the way taxes work is so in this country we have a progressive tax system. It means as the more money you make, the higher your tax rate is. But the higher rate only applies to the amount of money that's over a certain amount. Okay, so it doesn't matter who you are in this country, whether you're Bill Gates or I can't think of a famous poor person. Is she poor now? Yeah, okay. Lindsay Lohan. Okay. Bill Gates or Lindsay Lohan. Doesn't matter. The first, if they were both single, okay, the first $9,000, $9,875 would all be taxed at 10%. If Lindsay makes more than $9,000, and Bill Gates obviously does too, their next bucket of income from $9,875 to $40,125 is taxed at 12%, and then going down, the more money you make, so the money in between these buckets are taxed at a higher rate. Okay, No, okay, so no, because it's only on that dollar, right? If you're at 40,126, only that $1 is in the 22% bracket. So everything under that is taxed at the 12% and the 10% rates. But that $1 that's in here is taxed at 22. Okay, makes sense? It can be a little confusing. Like I had classmates in law school that still misinterpreted this the way it worked, because they thought that when you got into a higher bracket, then every part of your income was attached to that higher income rate. And that's not the way it works. It's only that. So that $1 here is going to be taxed. So 22 cents of that $1 will go to taxes, and 78 cents is your take home. Okay. And so as you go up and up and up, you can see 37% for that you'll pay on taxes for every dollar over 518,401. Okay, so if you had 518,402, those $2 would be taxed at 37%. Everything else is taxed at a lower rate. No, it's not about theft. And I hate it when people say taxation is theft. Hate it, right? I look at it, is taxation ever fair? Like when you hear people say, we want people to pay their fair share. What's the problem with that statement? No. Like when people in politics talk about people wanting the rich to pay their fair share, they tend to talk about the rich paying a higher rate. But what's the problem with the statement? I don't necessarily have a problem with the what? Possibly. Could some people see it as being fair if the rich pay higher? Yeah. Is the word fair subjective? Absolutely. What is fair to you may not be fair to me. Therefore, when it comes to talking about tax policy, I hate the use of the word fair. Hate it. Because it's a non-starter. What you see as fair, I won't see as fair. I prefer looking at it as a practical matter. What do taxes do? Yeah, they pay for our government. They pay for our services. What's our debt right now? About 27 trillion. What's our deficit right now? We're around $3 trillion in deficit spending, meaning for 2020, we're spending 3 trillion more than the tax revenue coming in. And that could be, right? But from a practical matter, if we're serious about getting our debt under control, right? Just like if any one of us, okay, if people are running into debt and continuously overspending, they have two options: cut spending, and what else? What else could people do? Well, volunteer doesn't bring you in extra income. Heaven, how many jobs do you want to have during residency?
2.
Okay, even though that's not practical, okay? But you either, if you're in a lot of debt, you either have to cut your spending or take on a second job, increase your revenue, increase your income, right? Or do both, cut spending and do this if you're really serious about paying down debt. But right now, going with us spending $3 trillion a year more than we're bringing in. Is that sustainable? No. And a lot of that 3 trillion was due to the pandemic. So we can think, okay, in the future years, we're not going to be doing $3 trillion a year extra spending. Is that reasonable to think? Like that this is a one-off? Yeah. But even before the pandemic, you know what our budget deficit was? Like back in January and February, we were projecting a budget deficit for this year of $1 trillion already. Right? So even before the pandemic, before all this extra spending, we were taking in less revenue than we were spending. That's not sustainable, right? So the fairness argument for taxes, non-starter, because everyone's going to have different opinions on that. Practically, though, we do have a revenue expense problem. And so if we're wanting to tackle that, we have to either increase taxes to increase our revenue, cut spending, or do both, right? Otherwise, like there's no other way around it, okay? But that's how it's set. Do y'all know what the highest tax rate was in our history? Nope. Nope. Higher. Higher. Higher.
75,
Higher.
80,
Higher.
90,
A little bit higher.
95.
95.
That's a socialist.
You know when we had the 95% tax rate? After World War II. Why do you think we had the 95% tax rate after World War II?
They want to steal people's money.
War.
Huh?
War costs money.
War costs money. And so back in the 50s, we were like, hey, or 40s and 50s, we were like, hey, we got to pay for this war that we've gone into debt for.
I thought the losing country always.
No,
That's what they did to Germany.
in World War I. And
We could do it again after World War II.
'Cause-
That's
'cause
why it happened.
that's why World War II happened.
People don't learn from the past mistakes.
If we followed that. They did learn from it, though. That was the point, right? So, but we went to 95%, our top marginal rate. Now, everybody in this country did not pay 95%, right? It was the bucketing system like we have here, okay? So only the very wealthy who could afford to pay the 95% paid the 95% on whatever income was in that bracket, okay? And if you look at our chart that shows our debt over that period of time, our debt spiked up because of World War II. And under that 95% higher tax rate, our debt within the next 10 years came back down to a reasonable level, right? Because we increased. And then once the debt came back down, did we keep the tax rate at 95%? No, we cut it because we didn't need it as much.
I don't know. It just seems like it's always like this spending to go.
That's something to, like, that doesn't change the practical aspect of spending. And there used to be this old, or the practical aspect of using taxes to pay for spending. There used to be this old strategy called starve the beast. Have any of you heard of that? Okay, it was this old strategy that people thought may work to rein in the size of government. And the idea was, we'll just keep on cutting taxes lower and lower and lower so that the government can't operate and can't grow as much. What does that overlook, though? If the government doesn't have the tax revenue to pay for things, what does the government do? What have we been doing? Where do we get the money? Or, which is, we borrow. So the government borrows money. So this idea of starving the beast and has had the implication of growing our debt. because we've tried to starve the beast, but the government keeps on borrowing money to pay for things. And so our debt has now ballooned to 27 trillion. Right. Okay, so going back to the tax savings of capital gains and versus regular income. Okay, you're going to pay 15% on capital gains if you're between $40,000 and $441,000. Okay, so the vast number of Americans, what's their long-term capital gains rate? 15%.
What's the
Average
average income?
income, median income is about 56,000. Right, but the vast people with 56,000 don't necessarily have a lot in the stock market. The people that have a lot in the stock market tend to be the higher earners because they have excess income for their expenses, and you take that excess income and you put it in the market. Okay, so 441,000 would put you, if you're single, into the 35% tax bracket. Okay, so that's a savings of, bless you, of about 20%. Okay, there. Long-term capital gains rates for people making over 441,000 is 20%. That's an income savings of about 17%. Because that only applies to people really in these two brackets, 35 and 37. Okay. All right. Okay, so let's talk about these two now. IRA and 401k. The IRA stands for Individual Retirement Account, not the Irish Republican Army. Have y'all heard of the Irish Republican Army?
They hate Britain.
They do hate Britain. Y'all know that the UK has Northern Ireland, all right? But there's a whole other country, Ireland, that's separated from Northern Ireland. And so the Irish Republic Army is in Southern Ireland, and they don't like the fact that their island is split into two. So back in the 70s and 80s, they were a terrorist organization. They would like blow up buses, and they ended up blowing up a plane too. Yeah. Yeah. So it's one of those terrorist groups that we really don't hear much about, but there's a threat of them coming back with the whole Brexit thing. Because if there's another, they kind of alleviated the threat of the IRA by creating a soft border between the UK and Ireland, so people could go back and forth. It was kind of an invisible border, right? With Brexit, with the UK trying to leave the EU, there may be a hard border put in place between Northern Ireland and the rest of Ireland, and that's going to result, or could result in increased tensions with the IRA. Okay, but think of it on your financials, IRA, individual retirement account. Okay, so this retirement account will stay with you. You can move jobs, it's going to stay with you. Okay.
Didn't that start in the Reagan administration?
The Roth IRA did, but the IRA's been around a little bit longer. Okay, the 401k has gained popularity. It's your so 401k. Anyone know where the 401k name comes from? Okay, this right here is our 2012 tax code. Okay, went through and studied this for income tax. Section 4, well, someone who's taking federal income tax in law school does that. Okay, Section 401k of the tax code sets the rules for these employee or employer sponsored retirement accounts. So 401k comes from this book. Nice, heavy book. Okay. 401ks are for-profit private institutions. For-profit private institutions. There are also 403Bs. That's for nonprofit private institutions. Nonprofit private. Okay, and then 457s. It's another retirement account for nonprofit public. Like government. Okay, 457s, nonprofit public like government. What do you think the Westbury Christian has? Remember, 401k is for profit private. 403B is nonprofit private, and 457 is nonprofit public. Everyone agree? Okay, you. No, I want to have the discussion. Good. We are a nonprofit institution.
Because like education.
No.
Sorry to say anything else.
Okay. Well, when in the past, a lot of students have been like, "Wait, it's nonprofit, then why do we pay tuition?" Right? Is that some thought, or do those thoughts sound familiar? Okay. So a for-profit private institution would be like Best Buy, Target, these companies whose purpose is to make a profit, right? So they have shareholders that they report to, things like that. Here at Westbury, your tuition goes to help pay the expenses of the school, which my salary is included in the expenses. The property taxes are included in the expenses, electricity, Sage Dining, all that is included in expenses. And so any money left over from tuition gets reinvested into the school. All right. Wagner and the board are not the shareholders of the school collecting all the extra money and saying, ha 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 ha, Scrooge McDuck. All right. They're not doing it. It all gets reinvested. In fact, right now, we've been getting emails about the annual fund drive. Have y'all heard on that? Okay, so the annual fund drive is used to help cover the costs of the school. Each year we use it to cover the costs. And if you were to compare tuition at Westbury Christian to tuition at Fort Bend Christian or other Houston area private schools, how does Westbury rank? We tend to be a little bit lower than the others. And part of that is because we use the annual fund drive to help subsidize tuition. So we don't have to cover or like charge y'all a lot more for it. Okay.
So non-profit public would be public school.
No, yes, nonprofit public would be public schools. Okay. Now, 401ks and everything else associated with that, 401k, 403b, 457, they have been growing in popularity since about the late 70s, early 80s, as companies move away from pensions. Y'all remember us talking about pensions? Okay, so a pension was called a defined benefit plan. And what that meant is when you retired and received a pension, you knew what your benefit was going to be. You were going to receive $1,500 or $2,000 every month for the rest of your life. Right? You knew what that was going to be. These guys are called defined contribution plans. I can't spell right now. Contribution plans. Okay. You don't know what your benefit's going to be, but you know how much you can contribute. So each year there's a limit on what you can contribute to your 401k, 403b, or 457. Okay. Now, the reason that there's a limit on what you can contribute is because of the tax savings with both 401ks. I'm just going to use 401k as because they all work the same. Okay. But 401ks and IRAs. So the limit, and I'm going to have to see what the limit is today. They've changed it recently. I mean, every couple of years it gets updated. Well, let me go back to this one. Okay. Okay, so the limit for this year, for 2020, is 19,500. So the maximum that you can contribute to your 401k is 19,500. Now, that's just your individual. If your company wants to, or your employer wants to add to it, the maximum that can be put into your 401k, both with you and your company, is 57,000. Okay, so let's do a little math here. If the maximum you can contribute to a 401k is 19,500, what's the maximum that your employer could contribute to your 401k? What is it? What? $37,500. Okay. Now, for most American workers, are their employers contributing $37,500? No. No. That tends to only be for your high income earners. Okay. Typically, what happens with these 401k contributions is talked about here, where your employer will match a portion of what you put in. So in some examples, right, you contribute 3%, your employer will contribute 1.5%. Contribute 6%, employer contribute, right? Sometimes 50%, sometimes it's percent per percent up to 3%. Okay. Now the benefit of this, and then we'll go into chapel real quick, and we'll carry this on. We'll take the quiz on Monday at the end of class. Okay. The money that you put in to 401ks and IRAs is pre-tax money. So it lowers your income level. If you have an income level of $42,000 and you contribute $1,000 to your 401k or IRA, it lowers your taxable income to $41,000. In addition, the money that you put into these accounts will grow tax-free. So you can buy and sell in these accounts and you're not going to be taxed on it. Okay, so it's going to grow tax-free. And that does help accelerate your investment growth. Okay. But when you start taking money out of these accounts, and you have to be over the age of 59 and a half to take money out without having a penalty. If you take money out before 59 and a half, it's a 10% penalty of what you've taken out in addition to the taxes. But when you start taking money out you do have to pay taxes on the money that you've taken out because this is money that has never been taxed before. Okay, and the reason, these are accounts that were created by the government, so the government can set the rules for these accounts. If the government did not create these accounts, then we'd all be in individual brokerage accounts paying taxes on their realized growth every single year, right? So the government's given us benefits with these accounts, and so we have to play by their rules. It just makes sense. All right, we'll stop there.